Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. I have a couple of allergies today, so bear with me on that. Turn in your Bibles to Jeremiah chapter 7. I want to fast forward for a moment. Jeremiah chapter 7. And there's a couple of additional points I wanted to make on 1 Samuel 4 through 7 before we got into the anticipated king lesson. We had left off talking about the larger theological framework of the glory leaving Israel. We had mentioned from Ezekiel about the glory leaving the temple, and I had made mention about the Ark of the Covenant and how I felt like that was just a foreshadow of the exile to come, of God, this dark time where God has allowed the Ark to be captured. He's left them alone to be defeated. From the people's perspective, they feel as, hey, this is the glory of God leaving and departing from Israel. And one of the points I wanted to make on that is that God's glory has always been in his people. It has not been in just the religious objects or the different things that God had instructed them to use for worship. It was in his people, and part of this text here is to correct that mindset of where they were like the other nations. They were thinking in a pagan sense, and Jeremiah really brings that out, and I think is a foreshadow of how they treated the ark is essentially how they're going to treat the temple in the future. In Jeremiah chapter 7 and verse 4 says, "Do not trust in lying words, saying, 'This is the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh.' For if you truly make your ways and your deeds good, if you truly do justice between a man and his neighbor, if you do not oppress the sojourner, the orphan, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, nor walk after other gods to your own evil demise, then I will let you dwell in this place, in the land that I gave to your fathers forever and ever. Behold, you are trusting in lying words to no avail. Will you steal, murder, and commit adultery, and swear while lying, and burn incense to Baal, and walk after other gods that you have not known? Then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered, that you may do all these abominations." So one of the points that Jeremiah here is making is, as you look at the context, is the people of Israel, God's people. We can't be destroyed. We can't go into exile. We've got the temple. We have Jerusalem. They were putting their trust in these things. And obviously, as you fast forward and you learn about the exile, the temple is destroyed. The people are taken into captivity. They are banished from the land. The land is destroyed. And so what it shows then is that these things, these objects, this place could not protect them. It was something else that was necessary to protect them. And I think Jeremiah talks about that as well as Samuel in other places. But the idea of if you want to dwell in this place, then you have to do right. Love kindness and goodness and righteousness and faithfulness and justice. And you've got to do what is right. You have to have allegiance to the king, loyalty to God. And that same lesson was being applied to Israel in 1 Samuel 4 through 7. Oh no, the Ark of the Covenant has been taken from us. God is not with us. And in reality, it's the people are not with God. And that's why the events happened that happened to them. And so when they're in the exile, they're learning these lessons that, hey, blessings to those who love God, who serve him with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength, and then curses to those who are unfaithful to the covenant. Any questions or comments on that? Another point I wanted to bring out, and we did talk a little bit about the ark and the Philistines' reaction to it, Israel's reaction to it. One of the things that I think is interesting is all throughout this text is that the Exodus keeps coming up, and we're going to see that multiple times throughout these passages. which automatically shows that the Exodus was a there we go. You know the word I'm trying to say. Moment in Israel's history, and so it was significant not just to Israel but to all the nations. The nations did not have any excuse before God. I know growing up, I often thought, how did God chose Israel, and you have all these Gentile nations, and they don't know God, and they they don't have those blessings, and how can they be saved? I had all those kind of questions going through my mind, trying to work through that. But when you come to these passages and you read about how the Philistines are afraid and fearful of the Ark of the Covenant, and it's because what they have attached to the Ark is this powerful God, just like Rahab did, and the hearts of the people melted when they heard about this particular event in Exodus. So what you're seeing here is that the other nations were without excuse. They knew about God. The Philistines at this point, and they do some good things in the sense of, quote unquote, in the sense of, they want to treat the ark with some respect. They want to offer sacrifices. Obviously, they're doing it in a flawed way. They're not doing it according to the Mosaic law, and obviously they're not under the Mosaic law, but they're doing things to show some kind of respect to this object. It's ultimately out of respect for the God of this object. And so there was something that even Israel could have learned from the Philistines here, in the sense of, notice how they are treating God, how they're wanting to be respectful and not careless, and the same should be true of Israel. But also the fact that the Exodus is important for us to study, to know. It wasn't just written for our learning, but it was written for their learning as well. And as they're reading through these texts, and they're over and over and over again coming into this idea of the Exodus. And then as we get into 1 Samuel chapter 8 through 12, and Samuel begins to outline the warnings of choosing a king, demanding a king. Well, here are all the warnings. And you get this sense that what Samuel is saying is, look, you're going to go back into slavery if you choose a king. If you demand this king, you're going to go back into slavery. And so the people have always struggled to get out of Exodus. And the prophets are going to really hammer that as well. And they're continuing even right here with their struggle with the Exodus. The final point I wanted to mention here that we didn't get to, and that was that God has always been the supreme over all the foreign gods. I really love the scene where the Ark of the Covenant comes in to Dagon's temple, and you have him bowing down, essentially. The next day, they come into the temple, and Dagon is on the ground. And here is Dagon, who is the father of Baal, and he's on the ground, bowing down to God Almighty. In this sense, the ark, but what the ark represents, Yahweh. And then the next day, you have the hands. The body is destroyed, showing that God is not only humiliating this God, which we should think about the Exodus and how he humiliated the gods of Egypt, but also there's military defeat, that the idol is destroyed. And then you have the plagues that happened to the Philistines. So just a lot of great things where it's showing the supremacy, the sovereignty of God, and how he is still in the background working for his people, even when his people are not being faithful to him. So, all right, thoughts, questions?
To foreshadowing here, the Philistines had to go in and help their God to stand back up again. What kind of a God is that?
Yes.
And then the Israelites are going to do the same thing. They're going to cut down a tree, and half of they're going to throw into the fire, and half of they're going to fashion it into an idol, and they're going to have to fasten it to the wall so it doesn't similarly fall down.
Right.
And they're going to call it God.
And as Isaiah says about that, what foolishness. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, The anticipated king. Now, what I want to do here in this lesson is pause in the text a little bit for a little bit and go back. Obviously, we're going to get to 1 Samuel 8 where the people are going to reject Yahweh. They're going to reject his commands, his rule, and I believe as king. And we're probably going to be doing a lesson on Yahweh as king here in a little while as well, and trace this concept of God being king and how he was king over the world, over Israel. But when you come to 1 Samuel chapter 8, you do have this rejection, and but you always have this tension in the text as well, going all the way back to Joshua, and you've got Joshua leaving, and there's this vacuum for leadership, and then you've got Judges, and there's this ongoing refrain of everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes because there's no king in Israel. There was no king in those days, and the idea, it seems, that Judges keeps putting forth is, well, we wouldn't have all this chaos, we wouldn't have all of this turmoil and immorality if we had a king. And I'll talk more about that when we get to 1 Samuel 8 through 12 and make some points there. But then you have Ruth that points to the king, and then you have Samuel who goes into this kingly or this kingship establishment. So all of these books are leading up to this point right now, this turning page in Israel's history. But I think that while it culminates in 1 Samuel 8, and then it's going to be developed even more so as we get into the kings and then the prophets and so on, I do think that what this moment represents is essentially what God did with the sacrifice of Jesus. So we know that God had a redemptive plan. He was going to save humanity. He was going to do so through the sacrifice of Christ, and how he went about carrying out that plan was through the hands of wicked and evil men. You had human beings who rejected, specifically Israel, rejecting Jesus, the Messiah, putting him on a cross, and God using that moment to ultimately make him the sacrifice for sin, to save the world. So you see God in using humans, using their flaws, sometimes their good deeds as well, to carry out his will. And I think the same thing is happening here in 1 Samuel chapter 8, here is Israel. They're flawed. They've got selfish motives for wanting a king, and yet God's going to use that to establish what ultimately is going to benefit them and help them, and that is through Jesus being king. But for Jesus to be king, there's got to be that kingship established. And so that's what's happening in 1 Samuel 8. But just like Joshua, Judges, Ruth looking forward to a king, I think Genesis and forward does the same thing. So I want to pull some of that out of the text, help us to have that mindset just like the Jewish readers would have had as they're reading these passages, so we can really appreciate the establishment of the kingship there. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12. Everyone here, I would assume, is very familiar with this passage. You have the Tower of Babel in chapter 11, and they're building this tower to the heavens. And if you remember, they're doing it because they want this great name. And then, in contrast, God calls out Abraham out of that and promises him a great name and a great nation. So I love the contrast between what the people want and desire to what God is going to give Abraham and then ultimately his descendants. But this is what Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 says, "And Yahweh said to Abram, go forth from your land, and from your kin, from your father's house, to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." A couple of things I want us to note here. perhaps you haven't thought about this, and that is if you're going to have a nation and you're going to have a great name and you're going to be blessed and people are going to bless you and God is going to bless those who bless you, and then God is also going to curse those who curse you, what does that imply? What do you think that would imply, to be able to have a great nation, a great name, and then a God who's going to bless you and then curse those for you?
It shows more than just that he's rich. It also shows power, some kind of dominion.
Yes, you got to have that dominion. You have land, you have a nation. To have land, to have a nation, to be able to be blessed by others, and also the ability to curse others, you've got to have some kind of authority. So automatically in Genesis 12, 1 through 3, there is royalty right here, just screaming off the page. At least it does to me in the way of how he's saying, look, here is Genesis 11, they're trying to build this nation, they're trying to build this great name for themselves, and yet I'm going to give all of those things to Abram. Now, it goes even further, and as you begin to kind of trace these promises, as you know, because God's going to repeat these promises to Abraham, and then He's also going to repeat the promises to Abraham's sons, Isaac and Jacob as well, and to Sarah. But as you get to Genesis chapter 17, turn there with me, Genesis chapter 17. And in verse 4, he says this, Genesis chapter 17, and in verse 4, "As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be the father of a multitude of nations." So it's gone beyond just the idea of you're going to have land, you're going to have a nation, you're going to have a great name, you're going to be blessed, and then I'm also going to curse those who curse you, but also you're going to be the father of a multitude of nations. So again, more of that dominion concept of you're going to take over, you're going to own these things. And no longer shall your name be called Abram, but you shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. So there is authority, and with all of these, with this language that God is using, it is showing that Abraham was going to have a level of reverence and honor that was due him. And I will, verse 6, "I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you," and notice this, "kings will go forth from you." So he's starting to, he was kind of, if he was vague in Genesis chapter 12, he's not vague anymore. There is actual royalty language here. Kings are going to come forth from Abraham. "And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your seed after you." So Genesis 17 absolutely establishes this idea of the kingship within the covenant itself. So that's important as we're thinking about the promises of God and how the readers are reading this, and they're going to be anticipating these kings coming from Abraham because that's what God said. So the promises need to be fulfilled, and God certainly will do that. Now, in Genesis chapter 14, let's go back to Genesis chapter 14. You do get a glimpse of Abraham, who is at this point Abram, mirroring this idea of a king. So, you know, he is wealthy, as we know. He has resources. He has the resources enough to get a small little army together to go off and fight. So you see Abraham acting, so to speak, as a king or a leader who's able to control and direct and have people under him. So he has authority, things like that. So he goes and he defeats the 4 kings, and which is interesting because that's what kings would do. They would fight each other. You know, nations would fight each other. And here's Abram, who has this kingly language in the covenant, and he's acting like that. And he's also rescuing Lot, and he's rescuing the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then tells us in Genesis chapter 14 that Sodom and Gomorrah go to bless Abraham, and then Melchizedek, who's that priest king, who also goes of Salem and blesses him for his connection to Yahweh. So you have Genesis 12 saying, I'm going to bless those who bless you. Then you have these kings, specifically Melchizedek, who is blessing Abraham. And you have Abraham, again, showing this leadership, taking over these other nations. So we see it, just a kind of a glimpse of it playing out, this covenant, this language of being a king. Now let's look at Genesis chapter 15. And any questions or comments? I'm gonna be doing some lecturing today because I got a lot to cover. Any comments along the way?
Well, just that, I mean, even with the very first things that you were pointing out back here in chapter 12, the picture that we see of Abraham, that God explicitly promises to Abraham, are the kinds of things that you see the kings claiming for themselves throughout history. I rule here by the authority and favor of God.
Yeah.
And that may even be true to greater and lesser extents. But this idea that he has a land that God himself has given to Abraham and that Abraham passes down to his descendants. They live on that land belongs to him. They live on that land by his grace. He owns the land and they live there according to his good pleasure. He can take it away from them anytime that he wants. We see a little bit of that in Pharaoh a little bit later. So it's interesting how we have these specific things that Abraham himself could claim.
Yes.
God told me directly that other kings only get a shadow of it.
Amen. And here's the thing is, going off, how Israel rejected Yahweh as king, notice also that, like you were saying, God gave all these things to Abram, and yet it's God who gave. And so God is higher than the king that he is talking about establishing in this covenant. And so ultimately, Yahweh is king, and so to reject the Abrahamic covenant is to reject Yahweh as king. So, yeah, a lot of connections there. All right, anything else? Okay, Genesis 15. And look with me to verse 5. And he brought him outside and said, now look toward the heavens and number the stars, if you are able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your seed be. This is, again, just the blessing of multitudes. He's going to have dominion. It's going to really just this idea of just taking over. And then let's see here. Let's look to Genesis 22. Again, same thing. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens and as the sand which is on the seashore. But notice what he adds to this now. And your seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. So not only are you going to have this dominion, this multitude taking over, but it's a military triumph over here going on. I mean, they are not going to any opposition they get. God is going to allow them to possess this gate of his enemies and destroy ultimately the enemies. Now, all this again is based on the promises to Abraham, and the implication there is covenant faithfulness for this to come true. But he goes on, in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have listened to my voice. So, something else to add here, and this points forward to the New Testament, and that is, not only is Abraham have this concept of the king within the covenant for him and for our royalty within the covenant for him and for his descendants, but ultimately for us as well. And that's culminated in Jesus. And so all of these passages in the New Testament talk about we're reigning with Christ, and that we're seated in the heavenly places, and we are a royal priesthood, 1 Peter chapter 2, things like that. That's all rooted in the idea of in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. We are blessed because we are royalty with Jesus. He is king, we are his subjects, and we are in his nation. So, you've got all that going on there. Now, turn with me now to 2 Samuel chapter 7, because this is pointing forward to David's time. And this is when God is going to make that covenant with him to establish his throne. 2 Samuel chapter 8. And I want you to notice the Abrahamic language here, the covenant language in this promise to Abraham. So now, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says Yahweh of hosts, I myself took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, to be ruler over my people Israel. So automatically, we've already known that there's going to be some kind of rule happening, and now that's going to be more defined in David. And I have been with you wherever you have gone, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. Think back to Genesis chapter 17, where he adds to the fact that not only will you multiply your descendants, your seed, but also you will possess your enemies. So I have cut off all your enemies from before you, and I will make you a great name. Go back to Genesis chapter 12. And what did God say to Abraham? I'm going to make you a great nation, great name, like the name of the great men who are on the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them. Here we go with the land, that they may dwell in their own place and not be disturbed again. And the unrighteous will not afflict them any more as formerly. Why? Because if you bless Abraham and his seed, you will be blessed. If you curse Abraham and his seed, you will be cursed. Even from the day that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. Yahweh also declares to you that Yahweh will make a house for you. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up one of your seed after you, who will come forth from your own body, and I will establish his kingdom. That right there should make you think of Abraham. In those promises, God says, no, there's going to be a seed that comes from your body. It's through his seed that all the nations will be blessed. But I will raise up one of your seed after you, who will come forth from your own body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him. He will be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will reprove him with the rod of men and the strikes from the sons of men. So showing that, while ultimately we know as New Testament Christians this is talking about Jesus, it's also going to play out in the lives of others who come before Jesus, specifically Solomon. And then he says, but my loving kindness shall not be removed from him, as I removed it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever. According to all these words and according to all this vision, so Nathan spoke to David. So I really think that the Abrahamic covenant, as opens up in Genesis 12, 15, 17, 22, where and so on, where God is referring to this covenant, finds its ultimate fulfillment here in David. And for that to take place, though, we've got to have the establishment of the king. And that's going back to 1 Samuel chapter 8. I think that's what God does, is he uses their selfish motives. He uses wicked, evil men who have rejected him to ultimately establish the kingship. But what he's going to do, as we're going to see the contrast between Saul and David, is he's going to give them a little bit of a leash, let them go out on a leash, and let them appoint the king that they want. And what he's going to do then, he's going to contrast that king with the king that he has chosen, and they're going to be able to see that difference between the ideal king and the human king based on their selfish motives. And we'll have more to say about that as we get into 1 Samuel chapter 8 through 12. But I want to go back now to Genesis 26. Genesis 26. And I want to show that as we've already seen, but I want to point this out though, that all of these blessings was based on covenant faithfulness. So verse 3, sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. This is Genesis 26, verse 3. For to you and to your seed I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham, and I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and I will give your seed all these lands, and by your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham listened to my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So that should have taught Israel covenant faithfulness. Our father Abraham was faithful. This is what happened. The same should happen for us. And then look with me to Genesis chapter 27. Actually, let's skip that. Let's go to Genesis 49. Because what I think now what Moses does here is he is going to narrow down for us who this king is. And it's going to help us with the lineage or the genealogies and then the lineage of David and of Jesus as well, to help us to know who the king is supposed to be. So I think God is giving all these hints along the way to just kind of narrow down that figure. But in Genesis 49, as Jacob is blessing his sons or giving his sons his last words here, Genesis 49 verse 8 says this about Judah. Judah, as for you, your brother shall praise you. And that's the actual kind of idea of his name. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Now, think back to that covenant of you will possess your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down to you. So think back to the idea of their blessing Abraham and his seed. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He crouches, he lies down as a lion and a lioness. Who dares rouse him up? Notice verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Now, I would love to get into a conversation of why God chose Judah out of all people to get this blessing, but we don't have time for that. That may be for another discussion. But here's this prophecy and this blessing to Judah, and as you know, these passages are ultimately fulfilled in Jesus, but this is how we get to David, who is from the lineage of Judah. And so is Jesus. And you kind of think forward to passages like Hebrews chapter 7, where the writer is talking about a change in the priesthood. I hate that bill. A change in the priesthood in the law. And so because of that, well, we can have a new priest. And that Moses didn't speak anything about Judah. They're thinking that the high priest is from the line of Aaron, and rightfully so. That's what Moses said, and yet there's a change. Well, all of that is rooted right here in Genesis chapter 49, and as you study this, and if you want some more material on this, I can provide that for you as I have time, but not necessarily in this class, but outside of class. But here's Judah, who Moses is setting up as you trace Judah through the rest of the Torah, and when you come to the prophets specifically, and he begins to talk about how God has chosen Judah and loves Judah and will protect Judah, and Judah is that's the center of worship. That's the line of David and the one who deserves these blessings. All of that's going to be found in the prophets. That's all pointing to Jesus. And as you continue to trace Judah, you're going to find that you're going to see him in the sense of a king, in the sense of a priest, things like that. But ultimately, he is going to be what was promised to Abraham. It's going to be that from that line, from Judah's line. The fact that his father's sons are going to bow down to him. He's going to have the neck of the enemies. The scepter shall not depart from him. The ruler staff the obedience of the people, belong to him. That's Jesus. And before Jesus, that's David. And so we're going to see that playing out as well. Questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Look at those verses 8 through 10. So we see that great name, the seed that's going to be coming in Christ, but that great name where they're going to defeat their enemies, as pointed out in Deuteronomy 33 and verse 7.
Yes.
As well as verse 9, that lion of Judah, point towards Christ, the lion and the lamb.
Revelation
5 and verse 5. And then the scepter in verse 10. Not only here, but also in Balaam's oracle, where he mentions that again, there in Numbers 24, but then the fulfillment of King Jesus. Psalm 2 mentions that as well.
Yeah, and to your point on Numbers, the reason why he's not going to curse them and wants to bless them is because of this right here. So, anything else? All right, I hope at the very least, even though we didn't cover hardly nothing that I wanted to cover, I do hope at the very least that this at least gets you an idea, and you can start studying on your own as you have time, of tracing the kingship from Genesis forward, and then more specifically tracing Judah. It's all over the Old Testament, and it's going to really open your eyes, and it's going to help you appreciate what God is doing in 1 Samuel chapter 8, even though it's flawed, even though they're in sin for doing what they're doing. God's going to use that to establish the kingship so that all nations will be blessed through Jesus the Christ. All right. I said all that. We still got 2 minutes left. So, one other thing I will show here on Jesus is, let's see here. Well, give me a second here. I'm going through my notes here. This will also, I do want to say this will also help us when we get to the whole house of Judah, house of Israel, and you start to see those differences. You're going to start to see that God is going to be favoring the house of Judah. It's going to help you explain those passages as well, and help you to kind of define what God is doing through that, trying to unite that all ultimately under David, but ultimately under Jesus within the new covenant. So like passages in Jeremiah. So just again, this passage here is going to help you to be able to deal with any of those passages that come up about Judah and about Jesus. And I'm going to stop there because that bell is going to ring here any moment, and I don't really have time to get into anything else. So last minute comments or questions? Okay. Thank you, guys.